Nayeli Greywind stood on the front porch, her hand unconsciously touching the bone bracelet her husband had once braided for her, the only thing that still held his warmth. It had only been a month since the Powder River swallowed that Apache man whole. 1 month. And yet it felt like a lifetime. And in that month, this land had not known peace. The fence had been cut. The well had been hollowed out, hiding a strange powder. Footsteps unfamiliar and unwelcome circled the house every night. Nayeli kept telling herself she was still strong enough to stand tall. But some nights, when the wind swept across the prairie, she could hear it, someone whispering by the door. It was not the wind. It was the sound of a threat. This evening, as she bent down to gather a bundle of dry grass to tie to the saddle, a sharp, sinister sound rang out, a metallic rattle. Cold and deadly, Nayeli froze. Beneath the grass, a live rattlesnake was coiled like a spring. If she had crouched half a beat faster, it would have sunk its fangs right into the edge of her thigh, where the artery pulsed just beneath the skin. She stumbled backward, heart pounding like it might rip through her chest. That snake had been placed there by someone. This was no accident of nature. The late autumn wind blew through, carrying a chill that cut straight to the bone. Nayeli looked around and spotted faint footprints in the dirt larger than hers, with a steel groove near the heel. There was no doubt left. Someone wanted her dead, and if she meant to hold on to the last piece of land that had belonged to her husband, then she would need to seek out the one man in Sheridan even the cruelest men feared. Cole Rennick. The Wyoming sky faded into late afternoon with a pale, ashen light that slowly swallowed the distant edges of the prairie. Nayeli Greywind tightened her cloak, climbed onto her old horse, and urged it toward Sheridan. Fear still lingered in her hands, the feeling of the coiled snake, the deathly rattle still echoing behind her neck. But that same fear pushed her toward the only decision left. She had to find Cole Rennick. People spoke his name with a mix of respect and caution. A man who lived in isolation on the outskirts of town, no friends, no family. Just an old rifle that had never rusted, and a steel-eyed stare that even the toughest men avoided. But he was also the only person in Sheridan folks admitted would never turn his back when someone was in trouble. Nayeli stopped her horse in front of a low wooden cabin, a thin trail of blue smoke rising from the chimney. She took a deep breath and knocked on the door. It opened just a crack. Cole Rennick's ice-gray eyes appeared through the narrow gap, alert, cold, piercing straight through the fear she tried to hide. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice deep and rough. "You came all this way to find me?" Nayeli explained quickly, her voice hoarse from holding back the fear. The cut fence, the tampered well, the footsteps at night, and finally, the live rattlesnake. Hidden in the hay. Cole said nothing at first. He simply crouched down to examine the scratch marks on the basket she had brought. He pulled out 2 snake scales still dusted with ash, sniffed them lightly, then pointed to the dry dirt in front of the porch. This was no prairie snake. "You can see the rope marks. Someone planted it there." He paced a few steps, looking at the boot prints she had unknowingly carried with her from the ranch. One glance, and he already knew. Groove near the heel. Stable hand boots. Varen's men. At the mention of that name, Nayeli felt her heart sink. Magnus Varen, the man both Sheridan and the Apache people whispered about with a name no one dared to say aloud. The White Wolf. Cole straightened up, pulled off his gloves, and spoke in a low, resolute voice. "You are not going to face this alone." Nayeli pressed her lips together, her eyes stinging. The words of thanks had not even left her mouth before Cole was already putting on his coat, grabbing his rifle, and walking past her as if the decision had long been made. "We go to your ranch. I want to see for myself just how bold they have gotten." Night had begun to fall, but for the first time since her husband died, Nayeli was no longer riding through the darkness alone. Night settled over Heart Ridge with a thin veil of mist, cold and still. So quiet that a single hoofstep snapping a dry twig sounded like a gunshot echoing through the dark. Cole Rennick stepped into the yard of Nayeli's ranch, his gray eyes scanning every trace on the ground, as if he could read the stories the earth was trying to hide. Nayeli followed close behind, clutching her cloak tightly. Cole's presence steadied her, but the memory of the live snake still lingered at her ankle like a shadow of death. Cole knelt beside the well. He scooped a bit of soiled ash from the rim and rubbed it gently between his fingers. A sharp, acrid scent rose. "Well, poison," Cole said softly. "This kind of stuff only comes from large-scale cattle operations. The Varan crew uses it to kill wolves." Nayeli swallowed hard. "Are you sure it is Magnus?" Cole did not answer right away. He walked to the cut section of the fence. The saw lines were clean, deliberate, and fast. Then he followed the faint trail of disturbed soil where someone had stood, watching the house. Finally, he spoke slow and certain. "Magnus has wanted this land for a long time. Your husband died. He saw his chance." The words "your husband" pierced Nayeli like a blade. Every image of him, his laughter, his hands. His eyes sank again beneath the cold flow of the Powder River. Cole looked at her, as if he could feel the weight pressing in on her chest. "You are not the only one he has hurt, but you are the only one still standing." Nayeli lowered her head, her voice catching in her throat. "I just do not want him to have died for nothing." Cole placed his strong hand on the broken fence post. His voice was calm, but it carried fire. "Then we are not going to let Magnus sleep easy one more night." They stood together in the middle of the grassy yard, their shadows long beneath the crescent moon. A plan began to take shape, bold, dangerous. But the only path left. Cole spoke first, his eyes sharp as the line between life and death. "You need to make them think you are weak, ready to give up." Nayeli looked at Cole, her deep brown eyes suddenly fierce with resolve. "That is the only way they will show their face. Not just their face," Cole said with a half-smile. "Their guilt." The earth was silent. The wind drifted up from the valley. Tonight was not just the beginning of a plan. It was the moment Nayeli Greywind stopped running. Rumors swept through the town of Sheridan as quickly as the wind racing across the prairie. Within just 1 hour of Nayeli Greywind riding into the saloon, everyone already knew about the Apache widow collapsing in despair, preparing to sell her land, and staying alone tonight. Nayeli sat in a corner of the bar, her shoulders slumped, exactly like someone who had lost all hope, but no one saw her hand beneath the table clenched into a fist so tight her knuckles turned white. At the counter, Magnus Varan stood in the pale afternoon light, his wide-brimmed hat shadowing half of his stone-cold face. He did not approach her. He only glanced once, a crooked smile tugging at his mouth, the smile of a man who believed he had already won. Cole had been right. Magnus took the bait immediately. When the sun went down, Nayeli rode back to the ranch. Behind the ridge, Cole Rennick and his 2 trusted cowboys, Hale and Jory, were already hidden in the positions they had chosen since noon. All 3 were silent, like shadows blended into the dirt and red dust. Nayeli stepped into the house, her heart pounding not from fear, but because the moment had finally come. The wooden home felt larger than usual, the wavering oil lamp stretching her shadow across the wall like a second wandering spirit. For a brief instant, loneliness crashed over her. For a month she had faced everything alone. The grief of losing her husband, the town's hostility toward an Apache woman, the unseen threats stalking her home. Standing in the empty room now, she realized just how exhausted she truly was. She whispered, not knowing whether she spoke to herself or to the man hiding somewhere outside. "Life is so hard. I have lived too long without a man. I need a man." Those words were the raw honesty of a soul that had been torn for far too long. Night fell completely. Then, the sound of gravel shifting on the porch. Nayeli held her breath. The left window rattled softly, as if something brushed past it. A figure appeared outside the glass, then 2 more. They were here. Nayeli stood behind the bedroom door, her hand resting on the trigger, her ears tuned to every breath. The house was silent, stretched tight like a drawn bowstring. Then heavy footsteps entered the main room. A man's voice whispered, "Do it quickly." Magnus's orders. In that instant, Nayeli understood this was not just a trap for her enemies. This was the moment she would choose whether she would live or die. She took a deep breath and tightened her grip on the gun. A sharp metallic click broke the silence, and the Wyoming night held its breath, waiting for the first shot. "I am truly grateful to have you here. If this story brings back memories of old days, dusty afternoons, and the echo of hoofbeats in your heart, then subscribe to my channel, so each day we can sit together again." and I will share with you another tale of the West. The darkness inside the wooden house had thickened into something almost solid as the three men sent by Magnus Varon slipped in. They moved with care, but not enough to hide the soft thud of boots tapping against the old wooden floor. Nayeli Greywind stood behind the bedroom door, gripping the gun Cole had given her. Cold sweat traced her spine, but her eyes did not flinch. In that moment, she saw it clearly. If she backed down tonight, she would back down forever. A whisper came from the main room. She is probably asleep. Bring the oil. We start the fire from the kitchen corner. 142C. 14T. N quoted braided. 14T. And remember, Magnus said take her alive. Nayeli closed her eyes for just a second. She heard the first man's footsteps approaching, felt his breath on the sliver of air between the doors. In a few more seconds, they would swing that door open. She did not wait. She fired one shot. The sound tore through the Wyoming night like a thunderclap. The back window exploded. Cole Rennick charged in like a shadow off the prairie, the oil lamp's glow flashing across his sharp gray eyes. He said nothing. He only swung the butt of his rifle, slamming the first man to the ground before he could even find a place to hide. Outside, Hale and Jory fired into the air to block any escape. The second man pulled his gun only for Jory to yank him through the window. The third ran in panic toward the stables, but Cole caught him in 3 strides. A sharp tackle, a scream, and the man was pinned to the dirt like a trapped animal. In the oil lamp's flickering light, Cole dragged him into the house and threw him down on the wooden floor in front of Nayeli. The man trembled, face streaked with mud, eyes wide like they were about to bleed. Cole placed the barrel of his gun on the table and spoke with a voice cold as prairie wind. Talk. Who gave the order? The man crumbled instantly. He confessed everything. Magnus had paid him to watch Nayeli ever since her husband died. It was Magnus who had ordered the attacks on the Greywind family to take their land. They had planted the live snake to kill her. And tonight was the night. They were going to burn the ranch and drag her away. Nayeli stood frozen, not out of fear, but because the truth behind her husband's death had finally shown its face. Cole looked at her, his gaze as sharp as steel but carrying something else beneath it. Sorrow for her. It is over, he said. Tomorrow, the whole town will know what he did. Nayeli looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly from that first shot, but deep within, she knew one thing for certain. Tonight, she was no longer the woman who trembled in the dark. That morning, the Wyoming sunrise rose slowly, but with an unusual brilliance, as if the sky itself wanted to witness the end of a crime that had gone on far too long. The morning wind carried a chill from the Bighorn Mountains, sweeping across Hart Ridge and lifting the red dust into small spirals, like whispers from old souls. Cole Rennick rode beside Nayeli Greywind as they made their way toward Sheridan. She held her head high, her dark eyes deep and calm, and for the first time in weeks, she no longer feared a shadow following behind her. The captured henchman was tied tightly on the horse behind them, his face pale, still stunned from the terrifying night. He knew one thing. This morning, Sheridan would hear every word he spoke, and Magnus Varon would have no way out. As the group approached the townspeople had already gathered in the square. Rumors from the night before had spread faster than the wind. Those who once looked down on Nayeli for being Apache now saw her differently. Not with contempt, but with caution, sympathy, and maybe even a trace of respect. Sheriff Quinn stepped out from the steps of the town office. He frowned when he saw Cole leading the man, tied like an animal caught in a trap. What is going on here, Cole? Cole did not waste time. He shoved the man to the ground and pressed a knee to his shoulder to keep him from running. Listen to what he has to say, then you will understand. The man broke down in tears in front of the entire town, all pride gone. He confessed everything. Magnus had hired them to harm Nayeli. He ordered her husband killed, pushed into the Powder River. He had the well poisoned. He planted a live rattlesnake on her porch. And last night, they had planned to burn down the ranch and take her away. Sheridan fell into stunned silence. An Apache woman had been the victim of the most powerful cattle boss in the region. All eyes turned to Nayeli, but she stood tall, proud, never once lowering her gaze. The sheriff clenched his jaw. He turned to his 2 deputies. Go arrest Magnus Varon. Do not let him leave his house. But they would not have to go far. From the end of the street, Magnus Varon appeared, his face red with rage, his eyes burning with fury. He screamed, "That Apache woman does not deserve to live on my land." The sheriff cut him off before he could say another word. He stepped down from the porch, one hand resting on his holster. "That land is not yours, Magnus." And today, Sheridan has heard enough. And in front of the entire town, Magnus Varon was handcuffed. Nayeli exhaled not in relief, but because for the first time in many nights, she believed she still had a future. Cole stood beside her, his shadow brushing gently against hers on the dirt ground like a promise that did not need to be spoken. The early summer wind swept across Hart Ridge, with a strange kind of warmth, no longer carrying the scent of ashes, no longer tinged with the bitterness of poison near the well, no longer trailing the footsteps of strangers lurking in the night. The air felt so clean. Nayeli stood still for a few seconds, just to feel it, as if the land itself was finally breathing again after months of suffocation. Since the arrest of Magnus Varon, Sheridan had grown quieter, more cautious. No one dared come near Nayeli's ranch anymore. But instead of leaving, she chose to stay, chose to stand, and protect the place her husband had spent his life building. On the first morning after everything, Nayeli carried each old wooden beam herself, rebuilding the fence. Her shoulders burned, her hands bled, but she did not stop, because with each post she set in the ground, a piece of her spirit rose with it. Cole Rennick stood at a distance, leaning on a porch beam, watching in silence. He did not interrupt. He did not offer empty words. Only when Nayeli collapsed under the weight of a beam too heavy, did Cole step forward, lifting it with one arm. His voice low like wind sweeping over the land. "This is not meant to be done alone." Nayeli gave a tired smile. A rare smile, fragile, but real. They worked through the afternoon. Cole repaired the stable. Nayeli patched the kitchen roof. Hale and Jory, on Cole's orders, cleared out every trace Magnus had left behind. By the time the sun sank behind the Big Horn Mountains, glowing deep red, the entire ranch was bathed in a golden light, like honey poured across the land. Nayeli stood on the porch, looking out at the new fence shining in the sunset. And for the first time, peace did not feel like a stranger. Cole stepped beside her. He said nothing, just stood close enough that the warmth from his shoulder brushed against hers. Nayeli spoke softly, her voice like night wind slipping through the cabin window. "If it were not for you, I do not think I would still be standing here." Cole stared out toward the horizon, where the last light of day faded. His voice was deep, slow, but there was something deeply true in it. Everyone deserves someone to stand beside them. She turned to look at him. She did not speak, but her eyes answered for her heart, a heart just beginning to live again, after too much darkness. Tomorrow, the fence would be finished. Tomorrow, seeds would be planted again. And maybe, tomorrow, she would no longer walk alone. Sunset poured over the Big Horn Range like a golden ribbon slowly catching fire. The last light of day bathed Hart Ridge in a warm, honey hue that made everything, the freshly built fence, the patched-up roof, the earth still scented with dry grass, look like a place untouched by blood and threat. Nayeli Greywind stood at the cabin door, her shadow stretched long across the ground, stronger than it had ever been. The months of running, the nights curled in fear at every footstep, the feeling of death breathing down her neck, all of it seemed to fade into the evening wind. Now, she no longer trembled, no longer feared a knock at the door. In the middle of the night, Nayeli Greywind, the Apache widow, had become the true owner of this land. Cole Rennick stepped out from the stable, removing his hat and brushing dust from his shoulder. The sun touched the brim, lighting his gray eyes deep and calm like stones resting beneath a stream. He stood beside her, saying nothing, but his presence alone was enough to make the high plains wind pause for a heartbeat. "The fence will be finished tomorrow," Cole said softly. "Your ranch will be stronger than it ever was." Nayeli turned to him, looking into the face that had stood through every dangerous night, through every moment she thought she could no longer carry on. Her eyes were gentler now, deeper. "Not your ranch, Cole," she said. "This land came back to life. Because of us." Cole dipped his head slightly, as if her words touched a part of him he never let anyone reach. The evening breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and warm pine. Nayeli stepped closer, her hand brushing against his, not trembling, not asking permission. Just a touch, but it was enough to make Cole Rennick a man who once believed he was born to walk alone in the dark. Pause. She spoke softly, as if to the wind, or just to him. I have been running for so long. But maybe this is where I stop. Cole looked at her for a long moment. No promises, no sweet words, just the quiet certainty of a man who would be there when she needed him, just as he always had been. He took her hand lightly, but firmly. The last rays of sunset slipped past the roof and fell onto the distant field of grass. Hart Ridge was no longer a place of sorrow. It had become something new, a beginning, for a woman who had fought to stand tall again, and a man who had learned how to open his heart. And in that burning red evening, as two silhouettes stood together on the horizon, Nayeli knew one thing: not everything we lose is the end. Sometimes it is just the path to something better. My friends, on this harsh land, it is not guns or strength that decide who is worthy of respect, but how a person chooses to stand for what is right, even when it costs them dearly. The kind-hearted do not wear armor, nor do they seek fame. They only carry a heart that feels for others, and hands ready to lift the weak. They rise when others bow. They walk forward when others turn away. And it is these people, humble yet steadfast, who keep this world shining, even if only by a single flicker of hope. It has been a joy to walk with you through this story. Wherever you are, I hope peace and happiness find you. I love you all. My cherished audience of Wild West storytelling. Let me know what you thought of this tale. Leave a comment down below. Type 1 if you enjoyed this story. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more dramatic tales from the Wild West.